Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is Ghost Warrior 38, and I'm bringing you another Shadow video. I'm wanting to talk about the Dark Horse run of the Shadow. Dark Horse Comics acquired the license to the Shadow during the 90s, around the time and leading up to the Alec Baldwin Shadow movie had come out. And so they published several Shadow comics. I have most of them here. I don't have a couple because some of them, or at least I should say, one of them was a Dynamite and Dark Horse crossover that was released years later, and one only or was only published by Dark Horse sometime after the fact. But I'll get to that when I get to those specific books. I have these in order, and this was checked through the Shadow Wiki page, not Wikipedia, but the Shadow Wiki page. They had a dedicated post about the Dark Horse run. The first series that had come out was a 4-issue series written by Mike Kaluta and art by Gary Gianni, and this was The Shadow in the Coils of Leviathan. You might recognize some of these because I've been reading the My City article inside each of the books. I only recently finally got issue 4, so I'll be able to read that one. Look forward to doing so. Kaluta does a very wonderful job with his Shadow and the way he speaks when compared to Denny O'Neil when he wrote The Shadow during the 70s. But Kaluta and O'Neil worked together again on The Shadow when they did the Marvel book, The Shadow Hitler's Astrologer, the only time Marvel ever published a book. Now, the second Dark Horse series that had come out was a 2-issue adaptation of the Alec Baldwin Shadow film. The movie adaptation was both written and illustrated by Michael Kaluta. Joel Goss also had involvement as well. The comic is actually based on an earlier script from the movie because Clyde Burke was also involved. Roy Tam, we still see that scene. None of the whole Tolku or that whole intro opening is not in this script. And Margot is not a psychic. The whole scene with his uncle, Wainwright Barth, Margot. They talk about Margot. Of course, Shiwan Khan's arrival. He looks a bit more like his pulp counterpart. You're a very unusual man, Mr. Cranston. You knew the wine I wanted and shared my craving for Peking duck. You seem to know what I want at the same time I do. I believe you're trying to seduce me. Call it a sixth sense. And that's the only time that's ever really brought up. Good night, Mr. Cranston. Good night, Miss Margot Lane. That's her father. But anyway, you get the idea. If you've seen the movie, you'll get an idea of the book. Really amazing Michael Kaluta art. He cuts his cute and falls to his death. It's like, I have a mission for you, my dear. That's just kind of about the end. Just showing you guys a quick run through on this. I've read this before a couple times. This is actually one of my favorites out of the series when compared to the rest of it. My favorites in no particular order during this run are In the Coils of Leviathan, the Shadow movie adaptation, and then I'd have to say Hell's Heatwave, The Mysterious Three, and then like the Shadow Doc Savage, and then one of the later books. So pulling these aside, speaking of which, this was a series of short stories. This is The Shadow and the Mysterious Three. The art varies from story to story, but it's an interesting read. I'd highly recommend still reading it if you haven't. I was lucky enough to pick this up at a flea market for $10. It was worth the price. And then after that one had come out was a 3-issue series called The Shadow Hell's Heatwave. Really nice, wonderful cover art. Some of the times the Shadow wears gloves, as you can see here. Other time the Shadow does not. But he is always wearing his ring. And then another later book was a crossover with Doc Savage. This one was the more expensive book to pick up. I had to pay close to $30 just for issue 1 alone. For some reason, this is the most expensive out of the Dark Horse books. Issue 2 was a bit cheaper. The art was not my favorite of this run, but I'm still glad I picked it up for collection or completion purposes. The story was interesting. I'd put the Shadow Strikes Doc Savage crossover better as far as story-wise. The artwork is subjective. You can take it or leave it. I'll actually show you some interior art on here real quick. And we have this here. Here's the cover again. And there's the inside, written this time by Steve Vance, Stan Manokian, and Vance Rauscher are illustrators. Dave Stevens, the creator of The Rocketeer, is the cover artist. Alright, here doesn't look too bad at the beginning. Hang on. We're back, folks. Sorry about that. Anyway, just here's some samples of the interior art. Sorry, lady, I'm waiting for a please, I need your help. I can do that. Where do you need to go? Basically, this woman's attacked. A friend of my father's father told me I could call this man for help. I don't know where to find him. She's Dr. Clark Savage Jr. Basically, he's looking for this man. The Doc Savage here looks pretty good. Reinstein. Monk. The Shadow shoots at Monk. There's Lamont. His face looks weird. Ham Brooks. And then there's the Shadow and Mo Shrevnitz. But yeah, the art's different. Harry Vincent, Mo Shrevnitz, Ernie Paul. This woman gets kidnapped. Ham has a cane sword. Nazis, of course, was close to World War II. The Shadow. Bringing the scum of Germany to justice. And that's just kind of about it. There's more to it. Blows up the Hindenburg. Species, a comic adaptation of the movie Tarzan vs. Predator. Here at the end. Doc Savage. I have that series. I have that 4-issue series. That's by Dark Horse. Coming in September. The art is, you can take it or leave it. Again, the story's interesting, but, like, that's really about it. And then this is a one-shot, but this was released towards the end of the cycle. This is the Ghost and the Shadow. This teams up Dark Horse's own character, the Ghost. I'm not too familiar with her because I haven't read too much of her comics to get the essence of her character, but you read the story from what I've read of it. It takes place in a future time frame, think kind of around the Shadow, Blood, and Judgment, because the Shadow has been frozen for a long time, and they basically wake him up when this Tibetan temple has been attacked. Harry Vincent's very old, like he's elderly. He basically wakes Lamont up and basically tells him Margot and all the other agents are dead. Then the Shadow comes back to wreak vengeance and havoc on the criminal element. The Ghost is involved, and it's just a whole big spectacle. There's like some older guy who's a mystic. I think he might either be one of the Tibetan monks or someone related to the Ghost's enemies. But his face is like really, really messed up. I don't know if it was like mangled or burned, and he's just like, his face is really messed up, or if he's just really old. But either way, I've read this. It was a bit confusing at times because I didn't understand Ghost as a character, but there's just enough. It gives you enough information, but I was like still lost on her character. But I'm glad to have this just for the collection purposes. And then after that is the Rocketeer comic books. It was a series of 3 issues. It's the Rocketeer Adventure magazine. It's 3 issues. Apparently issue 3 was published under Dark Horse. Issues 1 and 2 were a company called Comico. I don't have those, but I know of them. And that one of the books, Lamont does appear and helps Cliff Secord out. They don't address him exactly by name, but he has the trench coat from the Shadow movie or Blood and Judgment and has guns, and he has this maniacal laughter, so you know it's him. And yet they retcon into the story where we don't see him with it off, but there's a man that Cliff encounters that's revealed to be Doc Savage, but again, his name is not said out loud for copyright purposes, but they know that it's him, because there's also 2 of his aides, Monk and Ham. You'll know by their appearances that's who they are. I've seen the artwork on some of that online. I like how it looks, and I'm curious to want to read those for myself. And then lastly, this was a crossover between Dynamite and Dark Horse, like I alluded to at the beginning of the video. Again, I don't have any physical book to show you. This was Grendel versus the Shadow. This was during the time where the Shadow was under the Dynamite license, and then Grendel, of course, Dark Horse, that's one of their characters. And they basically did a crossover story. I have no knowledge or familiarity with Grendel of any kind, outside of what something a friend of mine told me. Basically saying like he's a criminal mastermind and he's a villainous type character. he told me a few books to look over, but that's just a well I don't really have an interest in going into at the moment. I'm staying with certain characters and characters that I like in order to keep a consistency. And that is it for the end of the video. I hope you guys like this little exploration through their run, as well as my feedback and discussion about it. The reason why I'm talking about this run in particular is because my next podcast episode is going to be over the Shadow's history and comic books, starting from the 1940s comics that were done by Walter Gibson himself, and the first couple early issues actually reused portions of some of the original Shadow pulps by looking at the pictures of the book online. To the dreaded Archie comics, and then going in through DC onwards. I plan to have a friend of mine on the show with me as we talk about those. That's going to be a fun time. Just have to figure out a time that works out for him, and he actually has some of the older comics that I don't, so he'd be able to send me pictures, and I'll be able to share those on the podcast as I talk to you guys more. But until then, dear viewers, I will see you all next time. Take care, and goodbye for now.